Hello, and welcome to The Alt Left.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 15 of the Alt Left podcast. Today's recording is March 13th, 2021. We are talking about death and the state in the United States. When will you be forced to die? When will you be forced to live? And what's the go-ahead in between? So stick around, buckle up. It's going to be a real optimistic and sunshiny episode here. Joining me on the moral majority is the good Reverend Dr. K.
Good evening, everyone.
Also is Matthew Jumbo Johnson.
Hello and welcome back, listeners.
And I'm your host, Chris. So let's talk about dying, boys.
Woohoo! One of these days, I think we're going to have to go with something a little bit lighter. I mean, I know it's hard in politics, but I'm telling you guys, these heavy topics are starting to wear me down. I'm thinking about maybe applying for some assisted suicide.
Depends on what state you're in.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
Although there is actually more coming. There's like 15 states. So yeah, 13 states considering death with dignity statutes this year.
And that's in addition to like what the 8 to 10 that currently allow it.
Yeah, there's 10 states that currently allow it, 8 that have specific laws or acts. And then there's 2 states, Washington and Montana. Washington is still in committee, so it's being considered by the state Senate. And then Montana, and what is gone on in Montana is people have argued for it, and it has gone through their state Supreme Court and has been ruled to be legal there in Montana, even though they don't have a specific statute or act that allows it.
Gotcha. And so just so everyone's clear, what we're talking about to start this off is the right to die. This is for patients that have a terminal illness. Their quality of life has taken an absolute complete dump. Maybe they've basically become brain dead, and so they're literally just surviving on.
Actually, those laws say nothing about people that are brain dead.
I mean,
there are some very specific things.
We're talking about the right to die. I'm just giving I'm just giving instances where that right might apply. I'm not saying about specifics of the law.
See, that's the thing is the specifics of the law as far as the right to die are outlined by like 3 or 4 very specific things.
Yes, but Matt does have a good point that it's a spectrum, because things like the case of Terri Schiavo, for instance, simply the fact that she was brain dead and had no other terminal disease, the court still cited. Now, you're right, that's not written into the law, but that actually comes into play and is considered a application of it all the time, legally.
But I want to be specific about this, because there is a difference between the right to die and having some sort of DNR order, so which is a do not resuscitate, where any extenuating measures will be taken to keep a person alive.
Yeah, no measures, yeah.
And an assisted suicide, or what they would consider death with dignity.
That's actually a hell of a point. You're right, because
yeah,
with assisted suicide, you're actually taking a medication to end your life, not removing
Correct.
care. So no,
Correct.
You're right. That is actually a good point there. You're right. I was wrong.
Yeah, it's an important distinction to make. And while the two things I do think are related, you're right. In the case of doctor-assisted suicide, it's important to make that distinction. I mean, we're going to talk about what we personally think in both of the similar cases, but you're right. We need to explain where the law is applying and whether or not that law is morally justified or not. I think those are the 2 parts of this conversation.
And beyond that, I just want to take a quick point out here to conservative listeners and honestly half of the liberal listeners. I want everyone to just take a good look at what just happened there. You see, Matt said something. Then Kay came in and said he was wrong. I came in and backed up Matt thinking that Kay was wrong, and then realized that actually I was wrong. And I misunderstood what Kay's point was, as did Matt. And we therefore both corrected ourselves and said, you know what? You were right all along. I was not. I will correct the way I speak now, and now we can all be right. And that's rare in the world, and I don't know why. And it pisses me off.
I could tell you why, but it won't make you happy.
No, cognitive dissonance doesn't make anybody happy. It's like waiting on a snail to get to you with the cure for cancer. No one's having a good day. Not even the snail.
But again, we digress. Okay, so explain to us, if you can, where the law applies and where it doesn't apply.
Okay, so first couple of things. Death with dignity, which allows terminal ill patients to end their lives through voluntary self-administration of lethal medication, expressly prescribed by a physician for that purpose. So what that means is that a person has the right to obtain medication that will end their life, and it is prescribed by a doctor.
And this process is actually really robust too, because it's not just I have a hangnail, time to go. To like in almost all the cases, I know Oregon was the one who started it. But in the first cases, and then as they've moved all through, all of them require 2 physicians to confirm a patient's residency, diagnosis, prognosis, mental competence, and how voluntary they are to this. Then there has to be multiple waiting periods. I think the lowest one is 2. And the first has to be between oral requests, and the second one between receiving and filling the prescription have to be required. So even once you've gone through all the hoops, once you receive the medication, there's another waiting period before you can take it.
Yeah.
Correct. Some of those requirements, besides what Chris was talking about, you have to be 18 years or older. They will not allow anyone who is not of legal age to ask for these medications. They have to be a resident in which the prescription was written. So if you live in Oregon, you can apply under Oregon. But if you live in Idaho, guess what? You don't get to just drive into Oregon, see a doctor, and then get written a prescription. You have to actually live there and be a resident.
What if I spend the night in a residence inn?
That doesn't count either.
Damn it.
Sorry. You have to be capable of making and communicating healthcare decisions for yourself.
I'm not capable of that now.
It's true, folks. We've seen it.
And I understand that, but you have to be physically able to say that this is something that you are interested in, you want the information regarding it, and that you want to take the steps that are necessary to fulfill the requirements put forth by the state for this action.
And I think that's an important distinction too, because one of the things that gets conflated is we talk about like the conservatives like to go off of like death panels, and these people are going to decide when grandma gets to take a bath with a toaster, and none of that is true.
No, not at all.
In all of these cases, you have to request it. It's not even giving you. It's like, well, we could do this treatment, or you could die. Your choice.
But something else that you have to understand also in these states, doctors are actually required as part of a diagnosis for a terminally ill disease. The doctors actually have to give this as one of the options of treatment, which I think is interesting. So they have to say, okay, well, we can make you comfortable for 6 months, or this is something else that is available to you. It doesn't have to be any greater than that. And the doctor actually has the ability to refuse to participate. Yeah. So if your doctor, let's say you've got cancer and your oncologist says this is an option open to you, and you say, okay, great, I want to go ahead with this, the doctor can say, I will not be party to it, and there's no repercussion against that doctor.
Nor should there be.
No, nor should there be. They're not forced into it. If they are so inclined, they can go through the journey of taking care of this with a patient and providing this service to them as part of their treatment. So last real requirement that I wanted to just talk about before we move on to talking further about it is that you have to be diagnosed with a terminal illness that will lead to death within 6 months. Now, these rules, as I've stated them, are almost universal throughout every law or act in every state that it is currently legal and every state that they are considering these statutes. And they're for a very good and specific reason, because it's necessary for these things, or for this, that we don't just have people willy-nilly asking for death.
Yeah. And again, that's something that needs to really be brought out into the daylight, because it's almost like the like the Planned Parenthood debate. Like, you can love Planned Parenthood, you can hate Planned Parenthood, but the people who hate Planned Parenthood are rarely in charge of any facts. It's
Correct.
usually a bunch of hyperbole. It's usually a bunch of horse shit. I mean, whether or not there's states where Planned Parenthood isn't even carrying out abortions anymore, and the states are still tearing them down. It's like they're giving out fucking mammograms, dude. It doesn't matter. There's this insane hyperbolic lie machine of these zombie lies that won't die, and this is one of them. That the doctors are coming to kill you, and grandma's going to get taken advantage of. It's like, you have to. It's easier to change your name on your social security card than it is to die when you have a terminal illness. There's an
Yeah.
insane amount of red tape on this one, for decent reason. I understand why. But there's a lot of things you have to do, both paperwork wise, wait time wise, and of your own free volition. You have to seek out this treatment. When you get it, doctors don't do this. They don't administer the treatments, right? Most of these are done through oral medication, and you have to go and fill the prescription yourself, or your caretaker does, and then you have to take it yourself. No one can put pills in your mouth. If you are
Correct.
incapable of taking this medication physically, which is really sad, because how insane would it be to have deteriorated to a place where this is what you wanted to do, and then at the last moment you're physically unable to. But either way, you have to do every step this way. No doctor kills you. They simply finally allow you to decide you're out.
Correct. And I actually really agree with this. And the reason why I agree with it is because I think that it's necessary for someone to carry it out themselves based on their own personal opinion and wants and needs. We cannot have doctors going into people's homes or into their hospital rooms and giving euthanasia. What I mean by that is injecting them with some sort of chemical that would kill them. We can't do that.
Yeah,
You
even
can't put that burden upon a doctor. I'm sorry.
even in the most
Yeah, I agree.
controversial of cases of these, like Dr. Kevorkian, for instance, right? He's looked on as Dr. Death, and I mean, he's claimed to do over 130 deaths of what he calls terminal people. Now, that's in question.
Yes.
A lot of people have shown that actually some of these people were hypochondriacs that he helped kill. Him and his lawyer say no, and they have their own medical paperwork. And so it's really up in the air, because unfortunately there are competent medical and legal professionals on both sides of whether or not these people actually should have died. I tend to side against him on this one, only because he's the one who actually has motive to lie. But
Mhm.
regardless, even Dr. fucking Kevorkian invented a machine that he would then put the needle in your arm, have the drugs loaded, but it didn't fire until you, the patient, pressed the button. And he would leave
Yeah.
the room. He would hook it up and say, the choice is yours. This is what you've wanted. They signed paperwork. They went through psych evals. And then he hooked them up to the machine, and they had to press the button. And I think there's a reason why everyone is on board with that, because it goes to show how much this is a lie. This idea that doctors are killing people. No. Doctors are literally providing you with a shred of dignity and self-control and body autonomy.
Well, and you hit on the key word right there, body autonomy. I think
Yeah.
where most of our listeners are going to learn one thing we all three of us agree on is the right to body autonomy. When it comes to the abortion debate, when it comes to this debate, when it comes to pretty much anything, we are big proponents of this idea that you should be allowed to be in control with what is done to you and by you, so long as it is not hurting, harming, or infringing on somebody else. And in the case of these situations, that's really what this boils down to. Strip away all the rhetoric, all the hyperbole, and what you get down to is that it's the simple idea of choice. Do I, as a person, have the right to choose my own path when that choice does not affect anybody else but me? And one of the first arguments I want to hit on that will come in from the opposite side of this argument is they will typically say something along these lines. Well, it doesn't only affect you. You have friends, you have family, you have people that are going to be impacted by your death. And the first rebuttal that I'm going to make to that line of thinking is, while that is absolutely true, if you're terminal, that is something they are going to be dealing with regardless.
Correct.
And I would argue, and again, this is coming from a personal place, so take it with a grain of salt because my emotions are absolutely involved here. I had to watch my father go through chemotherapy for about a year and a half. He never got better. In fact, he got worse. For those of you who are unfamiliar, chemotherapy comes with all kinds of additional little fun things. It's not just nausea and vomiting. It's lack of control of your bowels. It's weakening of your muscles. I had to carry my father from one end of the house to the other to the bathroom, watching him lose control of his bodily functions the entire way. It was a humiliating process for him. It was a humiliating process for me. Of course, I did it because I love my father. First and foremost, let's not get it twisted. I would happily do it all over again because I love the man. But that is a soul crushing thing. This all happened when I was 18, 19 years old. I am now 36. I remember that year better than I remember parts of my life that happened 2 or 3 years ago. It is it is burned into my mind. Now, you may be a person that you'll say, no, I want them to live as long as they possibly can. But you know what? That isn't your choice. And what I'm going to say finally against this argument is what you want in this case doesn't matter. In this instance, it isn't about you and your feelings. It's about the person that's fucking dying. Their choice is what matters in this debate, not yours.
But we live in a society where we don't believe in those choices. I mean, again, we're not going to go into this, but abortion is a big part of that. It's a whole lot of people who have no skin in the game making these decisions, which ironically is what the anti-right to diers say, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Body autonomy is key. End of story. No matter what you're talking about, if a human being does not have autonomy over their own physical body, then they have no freedoms whatsoever.
Agreed. 100%.
Yeah, correct.
And I will even go a step further. I absolutely, again, being someone that had to watch his parent die at the age where I was old enough to really understand what was happening here. Again, I was an adult at this point. I feel for you. Letting someone go is hard. When you love someone and you think you can get just a little more time with them, I understand the desire to have that extra time. Letting go is probably one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do. But again, knowing what I know now, if it was a choice between, if my dad had said he wanted this, and if it was a choice between having him go right off the bat and and stopping him from doing it and still getting that year with him, I choose to let him go and lose that year of extra time. Even though there were moments that I got value, I got to have conversations that I never would have had otherwise. And I found those conversations to be incredibly valuable. It is one of the most supreme acts of selfishness to tell somebody that they don't get to choose what they want because you value what you want over them, especially when we're talking about that person's own body.
Can I ask you a question real quick, Matt?
Yeah, shoot.
Your father died of cancer, correct?
Yeah, fuck cancer.
Yes, fuck cancer. The question that I was going to ask is he went through all kinds of chemotherapy and all of that, and that may have extended his life, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Having extended his life, do you think that the time he would have had if he would have chosen to not go through all of that treatment and instead forego it and live his life as best as he could and then chose to have physicians assisted suicide with some sort of medication, do you think that his quality of life over that end time of his life would have been better?
I honestly don't know. And here's the reason why, because he had lung cancer. And so with that type of cancer, it's going to directly impact your ability to breathe and move around.
Sure.
And there was some success in the beginning. He never went into full remission, but I do believe that at least that component was there. So again, it's hard to say. It's possible. Taking my own experience and my own situation aside, I do acknowledge that there's a lot of situations where what you're suggesting is true, where in foregoing the cancer, you can live just as long or longer than you would have with it and have a much better quality of life. But again, that's what we're talking about. It's this idea of choice. You get to choose the path that you want for yourself. And I think anyone that tries to step in, regardless of what their motivation is, because I do believe there are plenty of people on the other side of this argument that are doing it from a place of love and caring, but it's also an element of selfishness tied to it. It's they love you, and so their love for you is superseding their desire to have you choose your own path. And that's just not okay in my
I would
opinion.
actually have to disagree. I don't
Really?
think it's yes. I don't think it's love at all. I think if someone is trying to regulate whether or not someone else can choose their out, that's not love. Maybe if it's someone you know, sure. But to make this law or to stop the law where people can find their own out when they choose to and end their lives when they see fit and take that right away from them and force them to suffer, that's not love at all. All you've done is taken away someone's choices. I have watched two people and was with them till the end who were very close to me both die of terrible cancer, pancreatic and lung. Chemo is a great thing because either A, there's a chance it can actually help you beat the cancer and go into remission, or B, if it doesn't, it actually gives you a lot of time where you can get your affairs in order, say your goodbyes, go hop in an air balloon, you can it lets you do things. It lets you live longer and it lets you live a decent life longer, but there's a cutoff point.
Mm-hmm.
And that cutoff point is wherever that person deems it is. Some people are like, no, I'm going to stay in a hospital bed the entire time until the end because I don't want to force myself to go. I don't want to miss a goodbye. I want to get as many people in here as I can, blah, blah, blah. Fine. And there's some people who are like, no, the second I lose my ability to speak, I'm out. But what happens is with these, they go and when they're diagnosed or when there's absolutely no chance left, they go and they get the medication. It sits in a drawer until they're ready. And they have the option. And when their quality of life has degraded to a place where they no longer have dignity, that's their choice now. I personally, I personally know someone who is a wonderful man who used to be part of my family. He was great to me, and he was this stoic, amazing, just hilarious, funny, intelligent man. And he was just strong, and he was a badass. And he's at the end of his life right now. I haven't even seen him in almost a year now, but he was a shadow of who he was, and I know that honestly at this point he's just waiting to degrade until he goes, and it's sad, and I know that's not what he wanted because he was a person of he is a person of great, immense dignity, and that's what you're taking away. Because if someone wants to hang on to the bitter end, all power to you. It's your life. It's your choice. You hang on till the end, you yeet out early, or you find a middle. But again, anyone who says like, no, I am going to force you to lie in a hospital bed and shit yourself in front of your family while you can't speak or move in incredible agony because I love you. That's not love.
Yeah.
That's why I disagree. It's
Yeah,
not love. And even if it's a personal family member, I don't care if it's your kid. If you are forcing them when they don't want to be here, that's not love. That's selfishness.
I'd agree.
Everyone should
I,
have that choice.
I would absolutely agree. So, real quick, a couple of statistics here. 2014, 2015, and 2016, there were some Gallup polls that were done in regards to physicians assisted suicide or PAS. And each of those years, 69% of Americans said that they agreed that there should be some sort of PAS and that that was something that was acceptable. 69% of Americans. So basically, 70% of America says that this is something that should be allowed.
Don't you find it amazing how there's issues like this, or Roe v. Wade, or pandemic relief, where it has just massive support? It's not even close. It's
Correct.
just so massively popular, and yet it's somehow controversial and can't go through.
I think that largely has to do with the people that are in power. And I say that because the people that are in power are evangelical, selfish assholes that put their own beliefs and wants and needs before anyone else's.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of people in this country that continue to vote against their own wants and needs, especially when they're voting for things like senators and representatives in the House. Again, also president, because there are a lot of people that continue to vote for people that don't care about them. that don't want what's best for them. We could talk about the new stimulus, but there was no Republicans that voted for that. None on either sides of Congress. So, yes, I think that there's no need for these kinds of things to be controversial. There's no need for it to be a partisan talking point. There's no reason for why we can't have this everywhere in the country. No one is being forced into participating. No one is being forced into writing a prescription. No one is being forced into taking the pills. This is completely voluntary.
Well, and I think the important thing to also remember here is this goes back to some things we've said before, which is this idea that I've put forward that people like progressive ideas. And this is definitely, I mean, you've got some liberal support for it too, but this is a strong leftist progressive idea. This is something that the left wants. And that 70% marker is especially telling because, as I mentioned before, when you just pitch policy, you have overwhelming support. That's why I usually reject this idea that a lot of centrists try to put forward is that America is really center. No, America's really not center.
America's conservative.
Yeah, well, in voting, yes, but when you ask them about policies, even conservatives swing left because they all want leftist policies.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood you. Yeah, I misconstrued what you meant.
And that's what I'm trying to get at here is that if you really just boil it down to pure policy, this is a left-leaning country because these policies make sense. That's the thing too. It's like from a logic standpoint, from a humanist standpoint, from a fact-based standpoint, from any way you look at it, this is the way that makes sense. Go. If you care about lifting people up, if you care about your fellow man, if you care about personal choice, if you care about all these things, these kinds of choices are the way to go. So that's why it gets into things get so muddled when we get into, like what Kay was saying, when we start electing politicians that don't really represent us. And so it becomes this just weird thing that happens where when you just ask people about policy, usually you'll get somewhere between 2/3 or 3/4 of the US population saying they want it. But then when it comes up, it just gets smacked down because you've got all these elected officials that fight against it. It's ridiculous.
Well, there's been so many amazing TikTokers and all kinds of cool, like, kind of guerrilla reporters who go out to these far right rallies. I saw one the other day where he was out there and he's talking to this, clearly weird Trumpster cultist out there with the hat and the flag and the whole nine. And he's like, yeah, we really, guys like, yeah, and Joe Biden's not doing anything. And he's like, yeah, they need to get a COVID relief bill through. And he goes, yeah, it's exactly what they need. And he's like, well, they're trying, and the Republicans keep voting against it. He's like, well, that's only because of the minimum wage thing. He's like, minimum wage thing's been taken out. They're still all voting against it. He's like, well, they don't actually believe in what they press for and vote.
Yeah, of course not. Why would they do that? Because
this is a democracy.
Yeah, well, you think they represent the people? I mean, come on.
No, they want to complain about Mr. Potato Head's dick not in the package anymore, even though it never was. Like, that's what bothers me is from the get-go, Mr. Potato Head is a toy that celebrates being transgender and gender fluid. Like, It is the toy of gender fluidity. Republicans loved it until the Mr. got taken off the box.
And keep in mind, this wasn't Mr. Potato Head, the toy. This was Mr. Potato Head, the brand. And again, we're getting a little bit off track here, but let's just be clear while we're on this topic. There's Mr. Potato Head and Mrs. Potato Head, and both are under the brand name of Mr. Potato Head. All the company did was decide the brand is now called Potato Head, and underneath the brand Potato Head, there's a Mr. and a Mrs.
And the best part of it is them railing against this is literally proof that trans people fucking exist and they're wrong, because Potato Head is neither male nor female. I mean, first of all, the entire basis of their gender is whether or not you put the eyeballs that have makeup or the mustache. Or
how he presents.
Yeah, at no point do you put testicles or labia on a potato. Well, I mean, in my house, but I get weird. But for children, they don't put testicles on the fucking potato. So no matter what, Potato Head's androgynous. But the more important part is They're literally saying that the gender is based on what one presents themselves at, that the gender is a construct of Potato's consciousness and therefore has nothing to do with biology. And by railing against this, saying, how could you take the Mr. away? He's a man. They're claiming that Potato Head is a man, and the reason he's a man is because he presents himself and chooses the pronoun Mr. It's like, it blows me away when conservatives make the point against them and are too stupid to figure it out.
Yeah, but they don't even get it.
Yeah, oh, Biden's canceling Dr. Seuss. Actually, the Seuss children are canceling Dr. Seuss in books you've never read
They're
before.
not canceling Dr. Seuss. They are choosing no longer to publish and or sell some very select titles that exhibit ideas and things that they no longer want to portray, and so they've taken them off the market.
Yeah, but that's Joe Biden canceling Dr. Seuss, which, by the way, anybody, literally, as soon as I hear the word cancel from somebody, if someone says someone's been canceled,
I tune the fuck out.
They're done.
I just don't
because
care.
There is no such thing as cancel culture. It doesn't exist. It is consequences of your. Like everyone's like, Gina Carrera got canceled from The Mandalorian. No. Gina Carrera done Nazi'd herself out of a job. She works for Disney. Newsflash, you want that mouse money? You play by mouse rules. You play family fucking friendly. You don't go on Parler and Sieg Heil all over the fucking place.
Yeah.
Like, have fun with that, but you're not going to work for Disney if you want to do that. And nobody seems to really, again, the people and parties who tend to talk about personal freedoms and consequences for your actions tend to really freak out about them. No one has been I haven't yet to see a single celebrity get quote unquote canceled for behavior that wouldn't get them fired immediately from Burger King.
But with all that said, one thing I did want to kind of bring up, which is different, is I don't typically do this all that much in our podcast, but with this one, it's an issue. I think it warrants it. I wanted to discuss some of the other points that are raised by the opposite side on this. Because I legitimately, when we were researching this, I wanted to learn, because I wanted to believe deep down that on this issue, it was literally just people caring about the person dying. And I wanted to understand the other side. As per usual, once I dug deep into it, I found that it really just boils down to the people against this just wanting to control other people. That really what it boils down to, because a lot of the arguments presented, we've already kind of debunked in the facts we've presented. A lot of them are faith-based, which, as we discussed on previous episodes, your faith doesn't matter when it comes to legislating this government. We are not a theocracy.
As has been discussed in the fucking Constitution 200-something years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, if your faith says you can't kill yourself, don't kill yourself. You don't get to use your faith as a justification for preventing somebody else from having a choice. Any faith-based argument doesn't hold weight. It should not be considered in terms of this debate. Now, one thing I did find is a lot of faith-based organizations, I think, are very well aware of this, because they constantly try to pivot to non-faith-based arguments, but none of those are factual. One of the big things that I found, quote-unquote facts that'll be presented, come from religious sources, and they'll often say things that just are factually incorrect. I'm going to list a couple of these that I found. Terminal prognoses are often wrong. First of all, that's not true. When I looked into it, it was some minuscule amount of terminal prognoses that end up being incorrect. I think it's like less than a percentage. The often wrong wording is bullshit. I mean, it's this weird, clever wording that they like to do. They say often. Well, let's say there's, 100,000 terminal people a year. The number is probably much bigger than that, but let's just make it a nice round number. Maybe 5,000 of them are incorrectly diagnosed, which that sounds like a big number. But when you juxtapose that against 100,000, it's insignificant in the terms of the whole.
Or we juxtapose it against the amount of people on death row who get found to be innocent later.
Exactly, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But again, so it's this weird, clever wording they do. They can say, well, 5,000 is often enough to be considered often. It's not, okay? And again, as we've discussed, all of these laws have things in place specifically to prevent this thing from being a problem. So even if those 5,000 people have an incorrect diagnosis, you then have to prove that all 5,000 of them died by suicide, which I guarantee you won't be able to do, and that multiple doctors co-signed on this diagnosis. I'm not saying this problem never happens or won't happen. Part of being an advocate for this kind of thing is also being an advocate for common sense legislation that's put in place to prevent it from happening. Okay, we don't want people to just be able to go to a pharmacy, pick up a pill, and down it. We do want systems in place to make sure that everyone involved is making the best decision possible, including the healthcare professional.
Well, and we're never going to be able to legislate our way out of doctors making mistakes.
Ever.
No matter what, doctors make mistakes that kill people, not out of malice, because they're human fucking beings.
What I think happens here is a majority of the patients that actually ask for PAS are cancer patients. Okay. And it's because cancer patients, for the most part, when they're diagnosed with a disease that is going to kill them eventually, that is more likely than pretty much any other diagnosable disease. Because the treatment for those cancers can sometimes take a long period of time, it's sometimes very difficult to call whether a treatment is going to cure someone or make them go into remission, that we have this kind of a problem. And that's where a lot of this idea of, well, prognoses are often wrong. And it's like, well, they're not often wrong. It's that it's uncertain.
Yeah.
We're not sure. There's no way sometimes to tell whether a person who's got lung cancer, for instance, is going to go through their chemotherapy and get better or not.
Yeah. And here's the thing. When you try to get these little weird holes that they're trying to poke into it, it can be a convincing argument. But when you just pull it back a little bit and realize everyone involved here is a human, we're going to get things wrong. Science, in any respect, is not perfect. We make mistakes. The question ultimately comes down to, is the minuscule amount of mistakes being made enough to justify taking away someone's body autonomy? And our position is, fuck no, it doesn't. And you don't get to say otherwise.
Nothing takes away body autonomy, end of story.
No.
Period.
Absolutely it doesn't.
Citing without evidence what they're saying are failures of like Oregon and Washington's laws. I mean, they'll say things like the data on assisted suicide is flawed. They don't provide any counter data to support those assertions. They just outright say it's flawed. And I can't find anything to support those arguments. So I eventually, after about an hour or two of trying to find this, just gave up, because most of what the other side will say are these bullshit claims. They don't substantiate. They just say, oh, well, this side's data is wrong, so you should listen to us. And I'm like, no, that's not a good reason to be doing this. And when you realize that they're just making blind accusations, you can start to realize that their argument really isn't about saving any lives. It's about controlling other people.
Yeah, and that's what it always is. I mean, again, a very famous case that I remember growing up was the Terry Schiavo case.
I remember that.
Yeah, it occurred between 1990 and 2005, right? So this is really at the breaking edge, the frontier of right to die. And she did not have a terminal illness. Schiavo was in a vegetative state following irreversible brain damage. That was her diagnosis. And I mean, after years, I mean, it's not like she got put into a vegetative state and they went, okay, she's done. No, they tried every possible options for years, and one of them was literally waiting for years, because that will happen after a year, someone can actually have some recovery. They waited for years, and finally, after almost going bankrupt and just going insane, the husband finally decided to just remove the feeding tube, and the parents fought him in court, even though the law should be completely on his side because he was her next of kin. The parents still fought in court. Apparently, they liked reducing their daughter to a carrot. And after the husband won, going completely bankrupt, he finally won his case and had a painful battle. And now he lost his wife and his livelihood. A bunch of right-wing asshats, the same kind of people who call women whores outside of abortion clinics, had to get arrested, and were constantly being stopped at the hospital trying to like smuggle water in and keep this cucumber alive. And it's ridiculous. Like, they wouldn't even let a woman die with dignity. She wasn't allowed to. That husband could not finally mourn and grieve his wife. It's like they had to keep this breathing sack of meat alive because she was gone. Her brain was done. She wasn't there anymore. And yet these people will fight tooth and nail. And the same people who will scream about the sanctity of life and how the state should never allow a human being to be killed are the same hypocritical sons of bitches who are just trigger happy and gleeful to execute prisoners.
Yep, 100%. And that kind of
Uh-huh.
brings us to the flip side of this coin. And it's this weird dichotomy where there's no consistency whatsoever. At least on the left, we have some consistency, or at least when we are inconsistent, there's good reasons for it. With the right, not so much. They will claim life is sacred every turn when it's about inhibiting a woman's right to choose or when it's about inhibiting somebody else's right to die. The moment we're talking about prisoners who've committed a crime, all of a sudden they're no longer human. And every argument they've just made for these other cases goes flying out the window.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are a lot of states out there that still have the death penalty
Fucking,
available to them.
fucking Texas is happy and fights for the right to execute mentally disabled people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they are one of the largest proponents against abortion.
Yeah.
Like, they're one of the states that has made it the hardest for underserved women to get basic health care in regards to their own reproductive system. Just going and seeing an OBGYN or getting a mammogram, they have made it so that people have to travel literally hundreds of miles just so they can see a doctor.
Well, and the interesting about this too is this. So, where, as you said, Kay, I believe you were saying something like 70% of people are in favor of
Yeah, it's just under, it's 69%.
69. So roughly 2/3 of the U.S., like a little over 2/3.
Yeah.
A little bit more split with the death penalty from what I've found, and that's because, as we discussed, I think on previous episodes, pretty succinctly, there is something about the U.S. population that the moment somebody commits a crime, they immediately get rated as less than human, and once you do that, people start being completely okay with taking away those people's rights and doing the most horrible, messed up shit to them that you could ever think of. Now, there's some data on this. I'm going to run through some numbers with you guys if you bear with me here. If you have any questions or think I'm wrong on something, please stop me. But just a quick breakdown. So states that have the death penalty, there's 28. I'm not going to list all of them here. You guys can look it up. It's an easy Google search. Non-death penalty states, there's 22. Since 1976, there have been roughly 1,500 executions, a little bit over. That number peaked in 99 with 98 that year, and it's gone down steadily ever since. In fact, 2020 it was 17, which was like the lowest number I think since 1991. So we are committing less executions than we have in a long time. 2021 so far, we've had 3 this year alone. So we're still kind of, we're not super into the year yet, but that number could conceivably go up because I don't think the Biden administration is all too keen on letting people live.
I don't think you're wrong. As far as the number of states that have the death penalty, there are 3 also have governor imposed moratoriums.
Yeah.
That number is shrinking all the time.
Another thing I'd like to bring up is when people say like the prognosis is often wrong, they're talking about like 1 or 2%, right? Like that's
less.
that maybe less. Like that's our concerning number. That's like, well, wait a second. If 1% of these are wrong and that could lead to death, we need to really worry about that, right? Here's the thing. You're not wrong. Like if 1% of something is killing people, that's a bad thing. Coronavirus kills like a 1.5% of people. That's a terrible thing. It's led to almost 1 million deaths worldwide, right? So I'm not trying to dismiss that, but what I want to point out is since 1972, we've executed just over 1,500 people nationwide. In that time, 185 who were sentenced to death have been exonerated, which means they weren't actually guilty.
Nice.
That's 12.3 repeating percent. So if half a percentage point is enough to make you freak out about taking away someone's dignity and right to life, if that's your stance, how are you not appalled that 12% of people on death row are exonerated, oftentimes after they're killed?
Yeah, it's staggering, and then another element to this too to consider, and again, we're bringing race into this for a very specific reason, because as we've discussed, there is a disproportionate treatment of minority communities when these things are considered. Here's a couple of statistics for you guys. In Washington state, jurors are 3 times more likely to recommend a death sentence for a Black defendant than for a white defendant in a similar case. Okay. In Louisiana, the odds of a death sentence were 97% higher for those whose victim was white than for those whose victim was Black. And again, this is on the victim side of this. So if you get murdered and you're a Black person, the likelihood that the murderer is going to get off without a death sentence is greater than if you were a white person. Can't even give them dignity when they're a victim. In California, we had a study that found that those convicted of killing whites were more than 3 times as likely to be sentenced to death than those convicted of killing blacks, and more than 4 times more likely as those convicted of killing Latinos. Okay. A comprehensive study of the death penalty in North Carolina found that the odds of receiving a death sentence rose by 3.5 times among those defendants whose victims were white. Okay. So again, if you're a black person who kills a white person, the probability that you're going to get the death penalty is higher than if you were a white person killing a black person. That's insane to me.
Sounds about white to me.
Yeah, sounds pretty white.
And I got some numbers here on innocence too. So death row exonerations by total in each state amount to about 185 since 1973. These are people that we released before they got executed. Keep in mind, it was very hard to find the numbers on those that were exonerated after being dead, because most states don't want those numbers released, because if those numbers get released, there's going to be people crying out. We're just now, thanks to exposés and documentaries that have been releasing this stuff, like on Netflix and stuff, really getting to the meat of this. But it happens way more than you can ever imagine. One of the main reasons that we are against this, it's barbaric as shit. Arresting people for committing crimes, I think, is a horrible, horrible excuse for murder.
My thought is there's a lot of nuance and complications, and I'm sure that your opinion is far more nuanced than mine. But regardless of whether or not, even if we had 100% conviction rate, I simply don't believe that the state killing people and murdering them is the solution to teaching people that murder is wrong.
Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, because we've actually got numbers on that as well. So there was a survey of police chiefs. And again, I know you're not really pro-cop, but this is, I think, telling. Overwhelmingly, when asked what interferes with effective law enforcement, insufficient use of the death penalty is always the least of their concerns. It's always things like family problems and child abuse, things like that.
Citizens having cameras.
Yeah, exactly. In most times when we track this, there is no correlation between increases in the death penalty and lowering of crime rates. It's simply not a deterrent. It doesn't work.
And you're completely correct. But here's my thought. Even if it did, I wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Even if it was a decent deterrent, killing people to advocate that killing is wrong is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even believe in I don't even believe in prison sentences, first of all. I think prison is a place that only the absolute worst of the worst, who cannot be rehabilitated, cannot be helped. We're talking serial rapists, serial child molesters, people who have a sickness that cannot be medicated or taken away. Okay, then they get to go to prison and never get off. And they, while serving a natural lifetime sentence without the possibility of transfer or parole, if they would like the right to die, that's their choice. Because I got to tell you, I would rather die than live in prison for the rest of my life.
Hell yes.
But that's where that comes in. But the state saying you did stuff, even whether or not you agree or said you did or didn't, or whether the evidence says so, doesn't matter. The state has decided that you did something bad, and we're going to kill you.
Actually, you hit on a good point there. And I was saying earlier about how they're inconsistent. I'm going to take that back, because you made me realize something just now. They're very consistent. In both situations, they want somebody else to decide the fate of another person. They're absolutely consistent in that. I'll give the people the right on that on this one. When it comes to the death penalty, they want the state deciding who dies and who lives. And when it comes to a patient's right to die, they want other people like the state deciding who lives and who doesn't.
They want a state monopoly on violence.
Yeah, 100%. To clarify our point a little bit, I want to make something very clear. It is not that we are pro-killing people on the patient right side. We would love a world in which nobody died. Don't want a world in which the state gets to decide who lives and dies, and people who don't even know the person gets to decide who lives and dies. We want a world where people get to choose for themselves.
And the funny part is, that's a conservative argument. Personal body autonomy, personal rights, mandating your own existence and your own life and livelihood, that's a conservative viewpoint. It's a viewpoint conservatives pretend to have. Is this self-actuating destiny, right? all about self-reliance and self-determination. And yet conservatives are the ones who at every step, whether it's abortion, whether it's right to die, whether it's the right to, have your rape kit tested, which police agencies in every single county in every single state have rooms of them that they simply don't have the funding for. They have tanks, but they can't test rape kits. They'll happily not test your rape kit, but still send someone to prison over it, right? Usually if they're black. Is the conservatives don't want that. They don't want this right to determine. They don't actually want any of this. It should be liberals who are championing against anybody dying. It should be conservatives screaming from the rafters that you have that personal right and liberty to choose that. But they don't, because American conservatism isn't about conservatism. It's about who worships Jesus in the best way.
Yeah, this weird thing where it's like they've gone head first into fascism, and none of them, at least on the electorate level, seem to be cognizant of that. Some do. I think some of them have just simply decided that it's a choice between fascism and socialism, and fascism is a better option. But when I talk to people one-on-one, they will fight tooth and nail to try and argue their way out of these viewpoints being fascist. And by any definition, they are.
As Americans, fascism is sold to us as a mythological boogeyman that ended when Hitler died, and it's not a problem anymore, but look how bad it was. Whereas socialism is sold to us as the neighbor next door who's coming to give your children abortions and take your guns. That's what we're sold. That's the CIA propaganda we've been raised with.
Yeah.
Yeah, which just isn't true.
And it leads to the rise of fascism. That's the saddest part.
Yep, 100%. And to give you a couple other things, I did find this interesting. They're not entirely like any kind of like smoking gun facts, but I saw a Pew Research study, and anybody who's listened to our show long enough knows we're all a fan of Pew Research.
They do some good stuff.
Yeah, when it comes to polling, they're probably the most reliable. And again, as much as you can rely on poll data, Pew Research is a solid choice. And so this is a 2017 study that they found. So a couple of quick numbers here. The annual number of U.S. executions peaked at 98 in 1999, and I mentioned this already, and has fallen sharply in the years since. In 2017, for the second year in a row, the U.S. was not among the world's top 5 countries in executions. That's a good thing. 3, support for the death penalty in the U.S. has actually ticked up recently, but it's far lower than it was 2 decades ago. And I think that is because intrinsically, humans, I think, worldwide, I think, are getting to respect the value of life a little bit more. I think as a whole, I think that's a promising number. It needs to be a lot lower than it is, but I'm happy to see any declines in that percentage. Generally speaking, women will oppose the death penalty more often than men. White people will oppose it the least, with Black and Hispanic people opposing it the most. Well, no,
what a fucking surprise!
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Funny, the people that it affects the most don't want it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the people who are least likely to suffer from it are pretty okay with it.
In terms of age ranges, it's broken up into 4 groups, essentially 18 to 29. About half of them oppose it. And then when it goes to 30 to 64-year-olds, it's essentially a third oppose it. And then the 2/3 are in favor of it. And that holds true with 65 and above. Not surprising, again, with postgraduates, an overwhelming majority, about 60%, are opposed to the death penalty, because the more you learn about the world and the more educated you are, the more you're going to be against horrendous shit like this. And of course, the numbers go down from that point on, with college grad, some college, and then no college at all. And then, of course, again, not surprising, if you're a Democrat, again, about 2/3, 60%, they're going to be opposed to it, with only 17% of Republicans opposed to it. And then lastly, Americans harbor doubts about how the death penalty is applied and whether it deters serious crime. And again, we talked about this before. The more data we get on this, the more we learn that this is not a solution to crime. And so what we have to face reality here is that we're essentially murdering people just to make ourselves feel better. And if you feel better about killing someone, even if that person is a piece of shit, kind of makes you a shitty person too.
I mean, killing somebody doesn't make you feel better?
No, that's why I don't kill people.
But the thing is, that's a weird argument to me. The argument of that we put people to death using the death penalty because they've committed crime, and it's going to make us feel better? Who the fuck actually feels better?
I would argue a vast majority of people that are in favor of the death penalty.
Yeah, they get off on killing
I
poor
just
people.
can't imagine going, oh, thank God that guy's dead.
Yes, that's because you're a human being with empathy. Conservatives are not those things. I'm sorry. Like, if you're a conservative, you lack empathy and probably education.
Because this is something that I've actually personally had to evolve on. My stance was not always this. From about the age of reason to, I want to say, about 25, 26 years old. This was, I think, before I met you guys. My stance was very much that. It wasn't a feeling of joy that these people were dead. It was a feeling of apathy. If somebody is a child murderer or a child rapist or a serial killer, I don't feel anything or any sense of loss if they were killed. That usually be my position. That's why I didn't harbor any any feelings about the death penalty. But then I started learning the instances of wrongful convictions. And to me, it's not worth it. If we can completely keep these people away from society without killing them, and also on top of that, not kill innocent people, that's what I want.
And this is why education breeds liberalism.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth?
I ran across this quote the other day that I've been in love with. As an amateur historian, where it was this amazing quote that someone sent me. It was one of our listeners actually. It was one of the North Carolina peeps. It was Basehead Faye who actually sent, because we've actually been invited to a Discord from a couple of our listeners who talk politics, and so we're all in there. And Matt and I actually chime in from time to time. And she sent this meme message that I loved. It said, once you learn a sufficient amount of history, you must choose to become either a Marxist or a liar.
I like that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And speaking of our base heads out there, and the Fae, I don't ever want to anger the Fae. Is anybody still listening to us, Matt?
Yes, they are. So we haven't gotten as many shout outs this time around as we've had in the past. But there are a few that I'm going to do regardless. And one of them happens to be for Basehead Faye. This episode is dropping on Monday. We are recording it a week before. I'm not going to say what day because I don't want to put her actual day out there for the world to know. But she had a birthday last week. And so we at the Alt Left Podcast want to wish her a very happy birthday.
You're old.
Another North Carolina shout out is to user T Dibble.
T-Dibs.
He is now a proud father.
My condolences.
Yep. A baby boy, both baby and mother are doing great. And we want to say congratulations to him. I wish you well. Get ready to not sleep for the next 3 years and probably for the rest of your life beyond that.
Congratulations to your family, rip to your sleep schedule and bank account.
Yeah. For the next 18 to 20 years. Good luck.
But congrats on having a healthy baby.
But we love you guys. Our North Carolina crew has been endlessly amazing, constantly blowing us up, constantly interacting with us. Them and others like them are why we do this. Without a doubt, like you listeners that have been engaging with us, giving us shout outs back, blowing us up, we can't thank you enough. And in that vein, I've got two more that I want to do really quickly. So the first one I wanted to do is a response to a response. So last week we gave a shout out to listener Gary Witzel on Facebook. We responded in our shout. He responded to our shout out because he heard it and loved it. And so he says, just wanted to say thanks for the shout out. As I listened, I did notice the similarities between what I commented and what Chris was saying. Although I've educated myself about Martin Luther King, I would like to hear what Chris has to say about it. There's a lot to take in when it comes to education in America and the real history behind it. It's almost like a bite and choose situation before you can really put it all together and get a firm understanding of it all. Overall, great episode. I look forward to next week. And this was, of course, in regards to our gun rights and gun control episode. Since he responded, I wanted to give him another shout out and say thanks for engaging. If you have any more questions specifically about that or about an episode that's unrelated, we can answer you guys in social media too. Facebook, all of that. I'm the main person that's engaging on there, but I will absolutely screenshot and send your questions to the other guys and give you their responses.
Yeah, do it. Hit us up, message us, like us. Matt has no life or family or anything going on. He literally just builds ships out of popsicle sticks all day. So please bug the hell out of him. He's bored.
I absolutely am. And in that vein, we've got one last shout out to do. This is a brand new user on iTunes. So thank you for everyone for blowing us up there. 5 stars from JJ True, JJTRU, JJ True. I love the engaging conversations had on this show, even though it's all from a left perspective. It's not just another echo chamber saying the same things. Well done, comrades. We kind of are. I think
a little bit, but I appreciate it, comrade.
Well, you know what?
Thank you.
We do have differing views on the left.
So here's where we are a bit of an echo chamber, but one of the reasons I pushed for this and the guys agreed to do it is because I do believe our takes on a lot of these things are not the mainstream, which is kind of the reason why we decided to go with the alt left. I don't hear it talked about, these takes talked about in Democratic circles, liberal circles. It's not out there. Most of what you get that's mainstream are the MSNBCs of the world. And you know what? That's all well and good, but a lot of them get it wrong. And one of the things we wanted to do with this show is put out better ideas than what the mainstream left is currently doing.
Not just regurgitate talking points?
Exactly.
Because that's where the money's at, baby. Maybe we're doing this wrong.
You know what? If the right way to do it is to be like MSNBC, I'll quit right now.
I'm with her. Give me the pussy hat. Take my guns.
But I think that's what he was talking about when he means not just an echo chamber saying the same things.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, JJ True.
And on that one, thank you guys for listening to us. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for coming here every week and being part of this conversation. Again, the best way you can help us right now is iTunes reviews. We're trying to hit that 50 mark where, the listeners get to have a poll on the topic we're hitting. If you can hop on to iTunes, give us a review. 1 star, 5 star, we suck, you're awesome. Doesn't matter. Leave us a review. Please give us that interaction on iTunes. It really helps us more than you'll ever know, and it doesn't cost a dime.
And if you like us, absolutely, please subscribe.
Yes. And that's going to do it for us today. So thank you guys for being here. Thanks for being part of this. Thank you for listening to us talk about this. I promise, Matt's got a good point. We are eventually going to go into a bright topic. Next week will not be. We are actually going to have some guests on. We are going to be talking about Roe v. Wade, abortion, and body autonomy. And there'll actually be a woman here to talk about it.
2, I think.
Unlike Washington, D.C., where it's a whole bunch of white men talking about abortion, we actually might have someone who's involved in it for once. So, please be here. Let's talk about it. Get involved in the conversation. Like, comment, subscribe, share, everything. Just click on everything and send Matt a bunch of hate mail. We love you. We will see you next Monday. Thank you again for being here so much. And until then, remember, the revolution is you.